At my 72nd birthday dinner, my daughter raised a glass, not to me, but to my ex-husband. Then she laughed about crashing my car with the money I saved my whole life. I stayed quiet, just smiling. Weeks later, she was in court, stunned, as the judge declared me fully competent. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Evelyn Carter sat alone in the cavernous silence of her mansion, a house that once held laughter and love, but now felt like a mausoleum of broken promises. The golden light of late afternoon streamed through the tall windows, glinting against polished wood and crystal chandeliers, illuminating rooms that had become too quiet, too empty. At 72, she had grown used to the weight of solitude pressing down on her shoulders. Yet there was still a sting in it, sharp as ever, a reminder of the years that had unraveled into regret. Her reflection in the hallway mirror startled her, not because she didn't recognize the woman staring back, but because she did. The lines carved deep into her face told a story of endurance, of sacrifices made without thanks, of betrayal she never thought she would endure. The once vibrant young woman who had built a life with boundless hope had faded into someone hardened by survival. Evelyn's life had not been destroyed all at once. It had been chipped away little by little until she was left standing in a home that no longer felt like her own. Richard Carter had been her husband for nearly 3 decades. Together they had built this mansion, stone by stone, dream by dream. For years they played the part of the perfect couple, admired by neighbors, envied by friends. But love had long since abandoned their walls, replaced with sharp words, cold silences, and an ever-growing gulf that no amount of compromise could bridge. By the time he walked out, the damage had been done. Jessica, their daughter, was still a teenager then, too young to see the truth but old enough to feel the anger. She had turned to her father, believing Evelyn's rules were chains, believing Evelyn's love was suffocating control. Jessica never forgave her, and Evelyn, in her stubbornness, never begged for forgiveness. That rift grew into a chasm, and Evelyn lived with the echo of her daughter's absence, convincing herself she would never see her again. But years have a way of twisting fate. One morning, without warning, Jessica returned. She was 33 now, but when Evelyn opened the door and saw her daughter standing there, suitcase in hand and eyes carrying both defiance and desperation, time collapsed. The woman before her looked different, older, worn down by the weight of choices Evelyn could only imagine. Yet beneath it, Evelyn recognized the same recklessness, the same restless hunger that had driven her daughter away so many years ago. Jessica had no job, no home, no plan. She asked to move back into the very house she had once rejected, and Evelyn, against her better judgment, said yes. Her heart, so starved of connection, latched onto the hope that perhaps this was a second chance, a fragile opportunity to heal what had been broken. She told herself that a mother's love must always make room, even when it hurt. The first days felt almost like a balm. To hear footsteps on the stairs again, to hear another voice breaking the silence. These were small mercies Evelyn clung to. But as the days unfolded, reality settled in. Jessica had not returned as the woman Evelyn had hoped for. She was careless, thoughtless, and still entitled to everything around her. She left clothes strewn across furniture, dishes in the sink, demands hanging in the air as though her mother owed her more than a roof and a bed. The daughter Evelyn once nurtured had grown into someone unrecognizable. Then came the night that shattered even the illusion of peace. Evelyn had handed her the keys to her most prized possession, her car, believing that maybe independence would spark responsibility. Jessica returned hours later, the car's side scraped and dented, metal scarred by reckless hands. She walked past her mother with barely a glance, a flat apology tumbling from her lips like a formality, not a confession. Her voice carried no regret, only dismissal. Evelyn's chest burned as she stepped outside to see the damage. That car had been more than a machine. It was the symbol of her perseverance, of decades of labor and sacrifice. She had poured herself into it, piece by piece, as though it were proof that her life, though fractured, still held dignity. And Jessica had treated it as nothing. "What happened to the car, Jessica?" Evelyn called, her voice trembling with fury. For the first time in years, Jessica met her mother's eyes with an expression that chilled her to the bone. It's just a car, Mom. It's not like I ruined my life. The words cut deeper than Evelyn expected. Just a car. Just years of her sacrifices dismissed in a sentence. Just another reason to feel small, to feel unseen. Anger surged, tangled with heartbreak. You can't even take care of the simplest things, Evelyn whispered, her voice fraying. You're not a child anymore. It's time to grow up. Jessica crossed her arms, a defiant smirk rising on her lips. You're too controlling. Maybe you're the one who needs to change. Maybe you're getting old. Maybe you're the one losing it. Then she stormed upstairs, leaving Evelyn standing in the hollow quiet, staring at the dented reminder of all she had lost. Not just the car, but her daughter's respect, her daughter's love. The night pressed heavy on her chest as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories flickered through her mind like cruel reels of film. Every sacrifice, every effort to guide Jessica away from mistakes, every wound endured in silence. And yet here she was, branded as controlling, as weak, as disposable. Tears gathered in her eyes, but behind them, something else stirred. A shift, a resolve she hadn't felt in years. Evelyn had been patient, forgiving, endlessly giving, and for what? To be trampled under the weight of her daughter's disregard? No more. She would not be a doormat, not for Jessica, not for Richard, not for anyone. The pain was raw, but within it grew a fierce ember of strength. The next morning, as light bled through the curtains, Evelyn sat upright, her heart steady with decision. She would not continue down this path of silence and submission. She would reclaim her life, no matter the cost. For the first time in decades, she felt the ground steady beneath her feet. And though she did not yet know the storm waiting beyond the horizon, she was ready to take the first step into the fire. The morning after the wrecked car still lingered in Evelyn Carter's mind like a wound that refused to close. She had barely slept, her body heavy with the weight of disappointment and betrayal. The air inside the house felt different, dense with a tension that pressed down on her chest with every step she took. When she entered the kitchen, Jessica was already there, her hair tangled, her expression indifferent, as though nothing had happened at all. She poured herself coffee without acknowledgement, her silence another form of disdain. Evelyn's voice, when it broke the stillness, carried both sorrow and steel. Do you even care about this house? She asked. Jessica didn't look at her at first, only shrugged, her fingers curled around the mug. I care about having a roof over my head. She took a sip as though the conversation were beneath her. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she leaned on the counter, her patience eroding with every second. And what else? You come into my home, you wreck my car, and you don't even blink. Do you understand how much that hurts? For a moment, Evelyn thought she saw something flicker in her daughter's eyes, a sliver of guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Jessica's lips curled into a smirk. Oh, please. You always make everything so dramatic. It's just a dent. You act like it's the end of the world. Those words sliced through Evelyn like a blade. She steadied herself, pulling in a breath, refusing to let Jessica twist the truth again. It's not just about the car, Jessica. It's about everything. I worked for this house, for everything in it. I sacrificed my life to make sure you were taken care of. And now you stand here acting like it means nothing. I won't do this anymore. I won't be your safety net, your doormat. Jessica finally turned to face her, eyes narrowed, arms crossed as though bracing for battle. So what are you saying? You're going to kick me out? Send me back to Do it then. I don't care. Her words stung, but Evelyn held her ground. No, she said, her voice low but unyielding. I'm giving you a choice. You will stay here under one condition. You find a job. You start taking responsibility for yourself. You will not keep using me. The silence stretched like a taut wire between them. Jessica's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard, then hardened again with defiance. And what if I don't? What are you going to do then, Mom? Throw me out on the street? Evelyn's chest tightened, but she pushed the fear aside. She would not be intimidated, not this time. If you don't, Jessica, I will sell this house. I'll move somewhere smaller. You'll have 1 month to figure it out, or you will be gone. I'm finished carrying you. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt her words land with weight. Jessica stared at her, lips pressed in a thin line, the usual arrogance faltering just slightly. Evelyn could see her mind working, calculating whether this was just another empty threat. But Evelyn meant every syllable. Her resolve had never been sharper. "You can't be serious," Jessica scoffed, shaking her head. "You're just trying to control me again. You love this house too much. You'd never sell it." "You're wrong, son," Evelyn replied firmly. "This isn't about you. It's about me. I cannot live like this anymore, pretending that your chaos is normal. I'm done." Jessica broke the stare first, turning on her heel and storming out of the kitchen without another word. Evelyn stood in the silence, her heart pounding, her entire body trembling. She had said what needed to be said, and for once she had not backed down. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat by the window, the light casting long shadows across the floor. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the phone and dialed the number of a real estate agent. Her voice was steady, though her chest felt hollow as she spoke. "Yes, I'd like to discuss selling my home." When she hung up, she closed her eyes. The decision felt like both a liberation and a loss. This house had been her fortress, her prison, her history. The walls carried laughter that had long since vanished, fights that still echoed, and a love that had died long ago. But it also held her pain, her sacrifices, her daughter's cruelty. To let it go meant cutting ties with a past that no longer served her. That night, Evelyn lay awake again, but this time her mind was not tangled in despair. Instead, a fire burned within her. She replayed the years of silence, of enduring Richard's betrayal, of watching Jessica become someone she didn't recognize. She thought of the countless times she had bent over backwards, swallowing her pain to keep the peace, to be the mother everyone expected her to be. And yet it had never been enough. The anger no longer consumed her. It fortified her. Selling the house was more than a transaction. It was a declaration, a reclaiming of her life. Jessica had mistaken her patience for weakness. Richard had mistaken her endurance for frailty. But Evelyn was neither weak nor frail. She was still standing, still capable, and she was ready to prove it. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy quiet. Jessica barely spoke to her, retreating to her room, slamming doors as though each gesture were a weapon. But Evelyn no longer flinched. She had made her choice, and the weight of it gave her strength. She began sorting through papers, making calls, preparing herself for what came next. Yet beneath the strength, beneath the fire in her chest, Evelyn felt something else stirring. A shadow. A whisper that this would not end quietly. Jessica would not accept her mother's defiance so easily. Richard, too, still lingered in the corners of her mind, a ghost of old battles that had never truly ended. Evelyn did not know how far they would go, but she knew one thing with unshakable clarity. She was finished being the victim. Whatever storm was gathering, she would face it head-on, unbroken. What if the people you loved most weren't just drifting away, but secretly preparing to strip you of everything? Your freedom, your dignity, your very life. That chilling thought was no longer just a shadow in Evelyn Carter's mind. It had begun to take form, sharp and undeniable, and it would change everything she believed about family. The phone rang late in the evening, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet like a blade. Evelyn hesitated before answering, her heart thudding in her chest. On the other end came a voice she knew too well, Richard's, calm but laced with an authority that always made her skin crawl. "Evelyn," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "We need to talk about Jessica." Her jaw clenched. Just hearing his voice dragged her back to years of disappointment, betrayal, and the slow erosion of love. "What about her?" she asked, already bracing for the familiar sting. "I've spoken with her," Richard continued. "She's worried about you. She says you've been unstable, that maybe you're not thinking clearly anymore. I think she might be right. You've made some concerning decisions lately." The words landed like blows. Evelyn gripped the phone tighter, her breath sharp. "Unstable?" she echoed, her voice trembling with outrage. "You think I'm losing my mind because I won't let her keep using me?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to get some professional help," Richard replied, his tone practiced, almost soothing. "Jessica and I both want what's best for you." Evelyn closed her eyes, fury and despair colliding inside her chest. It was happening. They weren't just angry with her. They were aligning, scheming, ready to convince the world she was incapable of caring for herself. If they succeeded, she knew what would follow. Her money, her home, her independence all signed away under the guise of protection. She forced her voice steady. I don't need your help. Not yours, not hers. I've lived through more than either of you could imagine, and I will not be treated like some fragile, confused woman. Do you understand me, Richard? I will not be controlled. She hung up before he could respond, her hand trembling as she set the phone back in its cradle. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They were plotting together, mother and daughter, against her. It was more than betrayal. It was a declaration of war. That night, Evelyn sat in her darkened living room, the glow of a single lamp flickering against the walls. Memories cascaded over her. Nights she had stayed awake to soothe Jessica's fevers. Mornings she had worked extra hours to cover Richard's debts. Years of putting everyone else before herself. And now those same people wanted to erase her, to paint her as weak, to take from her the last scraps of freedom she had left. The fury rising within her wasn't the frantic, helpless kind. It was colder now, more focused. They thought she was vulnerable. They thought her age had softened her, weakened her. But they were wrong. She was still Evelyn Carter, the woman who had built everything from the ground up. And if they wanted a fight, she would give them one. The next day, Jessica tried to soften her approach. She lingered in the kitchen, her eyes downcast, her tone coated with false sweetness. Mom, I don't want to fight anymore, she said. I just want us to be okay. I'm worried about you. I think you've been under too much stress. Evelyn's lips curled in a bitter smile. Don't play this game with me, Jessica. You and your father have made it clear what you want. You don't care about me. You care about control. Jessica's composure faltered for a heartbeat before she recovered. That's not true. I love you. I'm just trying to help. Looking out for me, Evelyn said sharply, or for yourself? The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. For the first time, Jessica's mask cracked. Her eyes shifted, unsteady, and Evelyn knew she had struck the truth. The daughter she had once protected had grown into a stranger, a rival. And though it broke her heart, Evelyn felt the fire of defiance burn stronger than the ache of sorrow. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the glow of a small lamp illuminating stacks of documents, bank statements, property deeds, carefully filed records of her life's work. If Richard and Jessica thought they could corner her, they were mistaken. She would prepare. She would not allow them to lock her away, to steal what she had bled for. The storm had begun, but this time Evelyn would not weather it in silence. She would fight, tooth and nail, with every ounce of strength she had left. And she would show them that a lifetime of sacrifice had not left her powerless. It had forged her into steel. This is only the beginning, and if you've been drawn into Evelyn's battle, stay with me. Her story will shake you. It will challenge everything you thought you knew about family, and it will prove that even in the darkest betrayals, there is fire waiting to rise. Don't forget to follow along, share this journey, and let others witness the storm that's about to break. The air inside the Carter mansion grew heavier with each passing day, as though the very walls were absorbing the venom of betrayal. Evelyn could feel it in the way Jessica moved through the house, footsteps sharp and deliberate, silence wielded like a weapon. Her daughter no longer hid the disdain that smoldered in her eyes. One morning, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her coffee cooling untouched beside her. Jessica entered, her arms folded across her chest, her expression almost theatrical in its feigned softness. Mom, she said, her voice steady but unnaturally calm, I don't want to fight anymore. I just need you to see that I'm trying. Evelyn's eyes lifted from her mug, meeting Jessica's gaze with the weariness of a woman who had heard too many lies. You're not trying, she said quietly. You're maneuvering, just like your father. Jessica's lips parted, a flicker of irritation breaking through her mask. That's not fair. I love you. I'm worried about you. You're not yourself anymore. A bitter laugh rose in Evelyn's throat, surprising even herself. Worried about me? Or worried about losing what you think you're entitled to? The silence that followed was like a crack of thunder in the stillness. Jessica faltered, her composure trembling for only a moment before she turned away, her hands clenching at her sides. Evelyn knew then that the line between them had finally snapped. Whatever fragile tether remained of their bond as mother and daughter had been severed. That evening the blow arrived, a letter delivered by courier, crisp white paper bearing the letterhead of Richard's attorney. Evelyn's hands shook as she slit the envelope open, her breath stuttering when her eyes fell on the words. It was a petition, a request for her to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. They weren't just conspiring in whispers anymore. They were taking their war into the open, their intentions dressed in the cold authority of legal documents. They wanted her declared unfit, incompetent, incapable of managing her own affairs. The sting of humiliation pressed hot behind her eyes. But beneath it, rage ignited like a wildfire. She would not let them erase her. She would not allow them to take her years of sacrifice and twist them into weakness. The following morning, Evelyn found herself sitting in the office of Laura Mitchell, a lawyer recommended by one of her closest friends. Laura was sharp-eyed, her presence calm yet commanding. She listened carefully as Evelyn laid out the events of the past weeks, the wrecked car, Jessica's arrogance, Richard's phone call, and finally the devastating letter. When Evelyn finished, Laura leaned forward, her voice firm. "We're going to fight this, but you need to be prepared. They will try to paint you as unstable. We need to prove the opposite. Records, witnesses, evidence of your independence. All of it will matter." Evelyn nodded, though the weight of it pressed hard against her chest. The thought of bearing her life to scrutiny made her stomach churn, yet she knew there was no other choice. The next weeks were a blur of effort. Evelyn combed through old financial records, receipts, statements, all proof of a life managed with discipline and care. She reached out to friends who had stood by her over the years, asking them to testify to her strength of mind, her resilience, her clarity. Each call was both a balm and a wound, reminders of the life she had built, the community that had once admired her, and the reality that now she had to beg for validation. Jessica, for her part, vanished into calculated silence. She stayed out of sight, her absence almost as sharp as her presence. Evelyn could feel her daughter's cold confidence lingering in every quiet corner, the smug certainty of someone who believed victory was already secured. But Evelyn was not the same woman she had been weeks ago. She had shifted. She had sharpened. She no longer trembled beneath the weight of their accusations. Instead, she gathered her strength piece by piece, like a soldier preparing for battle. At night, she sat alone at her desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating her notes and documents. The loneliness was suffocating, yet beneath it pulsed something unfamiliar, a sense of purpose. Richard and Jessica thought they could define her, thought they could silence her, but Evelyn was discovering a strength she hadn't felt in years. Still, dread lingered. She could not shake the image of a courtroom, of Richard sitting smugly across from her, of Jessica's cold stare boring into her, of strangers deciding her fate as though she were nothing more than a case file. The thought tightened her chest until she had to close her eyes and breathe deeply to push the fear away. One evening, as she packed another box of records, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. Her face was lined, yes, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were alive again. They were no longer dulled by grief or worn down by silence. They burned with defiance, with the fire of a woman who had nothing left to lose but everything left to protect. The first shot had been fired. Richard and Jessica had made their move, but Evelyn was ready. This was no longer about money or property. This was about her life, her autonomy, her right to exist without being caged by the people who had already taken so much from her. She pressed her palm flat against the papers spread across her desk, grounding herself in their texture, in their proof of her strength. "They won't win," she whispered into the stillness. "Not this time." Outside, the night deepened, shadows creeping across the mansion's walls. The storm was coming, closer now, its rumble echoing in her bones. But Evelyn Carter stood straighter than she had in years, her resolve harder than steel. The war for her dignity had begun. Imagine walking into a courtroom knowing that your own family is waiting for you to fall, knowing that every word spoken could either save your freedom or condemn you to a life stripped of dignity. That was the weight pressing down on Evelyn Carter as she stood before the double doors of the courthouse. The air was crisp, the sky above sharp and mercilessly blue, but inside her chest, thunder raged. Laura Mitchell walked beside her, a steady presence, her briefcase in hand and her expression resolute. "Stay calm," Laura murmured. "You've done everything right. You're prepared. Don't let them rattle you." Evelyn nodded, though her throat was tight, her palms damp. For 72 years, she had fought battles of survival, endured heartbreak, endured betrayal. But nothing had ever felt as terrifying as this moment. Walking into a room where strangers would weigh her very sanity against the lies spun by those who should have loved her most. The courtroom was cold, the scent of old wood and paper hanging in the air. Richard sat at the opposing table, his suit perfectly pressed, his smirk polished with arrogance. Beside him sat Jessica, her posture straight, her expression carved from stone. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Her daughter didn't look at her with hesitation or regret, only with the unyielding resolve of an enemy. Laura guided her to their table. "Remember," she whispered, "we're not here to prove you're perfect. We're here to prove you're capable. Stay grounded." The proceedings began, the judge presiding with a detached authority that made Evelyn's stomach churn. Richard's attorney rose first, his voice smooth as he painted Evelyn in strokes of instability. He spoke of rash decisions, erratic behavior, poor judgment, words that twisted her actions into something grotesque. Evelyn's pulse quickened, her nails biting into her palms beneath the table. Each accusation landed like a stone, a calculated strike meant to shatter her credibility. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her, weighing her, dissecting her. When her turn came, Laura stood tall, her voice steady and commanding. She spoke of Evelyn's independence, her meticulous management of her finances, her steady involvement in her community. She presented records, letters, witnesses prepared to speak on Evelyn's behalf. With each piece of evidence, Evelyn felt a thread of strength pulling her back together. Then came the moment Evelyn dreaded, the testimony. Laura gave her a reassuring glance before guiding her to the stand. Evelyn's knees shook as she rose, but her spine held straight. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, and lowered herself into the witness chair. The attorney for Richard leaned forward, his eyes sharp with the confidence of a predator. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "would you describe your mental state over the past few months?" Her breath trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Clear," she said. "I am in full control of my decisions. My daughter may not like them, but that does not make me unfit." The questions came fast, designed to confuse, to twist her words, to provoke her into breaking. They asked about the car, about the decision to sell the house, about her arguments with Jessica. Each one felt like a trap, but Evelyn refused to stumble. Her voice grew steadier with every answer. Her words cut sharper with every attempt to undermine her. Finally, Laura stepped forward for redirect. "Mrs. Carter, why do you believe your husband and daughter are pursuing this petition?" Evelyn's eyes burned, but she didn't look at Richard or Jessica. She looked straight at the judge. "Because I refuse to keep being their safety net. Because I chose myself for the first time in years. They don't want me incompetent. They want me silent. And I will not be silenced." The words echoed in the courtroom, heavy, unshakable. For a moment, the air itself seemed to still. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. "The court will recess for the day. A ruling will be delivered tomorrow morning." Evelyn stepped down from the stand, her body trembling with exhaustion. She returned to Laura's side, her heart still hammering, her breath uneven. Richard smirked across the room. Jessica sat motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But Evelyn saw it, a flicker of unease in her daughter's eyes, a shadow of doubt that betrayed the cracks beneath her cold exterior. As the gavel struck and the courtroom emptied, Evelyn felt a strange calm settle over her. The storm had not yet passed. Tomorrow the judgment would come, and with it either her liberation or her downfall. But she had spoken her truth, unbroken, unafraid. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in a golden glow. Evelyn paused, her hand resting on the railing, the warmth on her face both foreign and comforting. For the first time in weeks, she felt a fragile sense of peace. She had stepped into the fire, And though the flames licked at her, she was still standing. If Evelyn's courage has stirred something within you, if her fight against betrayal reminds you of the strength hidden in your own battles, then stay with this story. Like, share, and subscribe so others may hear her voice, for the storm is not yet over, and what comes next will leave you breathless. The morning light spilled across the courthouse steps, pale and unforgiving. Evelyn Carter stood in its glow, her heart pounding with a rhythm that seemed to echo through her entire body. The night before had been restless. Sleep came in fragments, broken by visions of Judge's gavels, of Richard's smirk, of Jessica's unyielding eyes. But now there was no time for fear. Today the verdict would be spoken, and with it, her fate. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation. Every whisper, every rustle of papers seemed louder than it should have been. Evelyn sat beside Laura Mitchell, her lawyer's presence a steady anchor against the storm raging within her. Across the aisle, Richard leaned back in his chair, the picture of smug confidence. Jessica sat poised beside him, her face composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were the dutiful daughter simply fulfilling her role. Evelyn could not bring herself to look directly at her daughter. It hurt too much, yet in her peripheral vision, she noticed every flicker of Jessica's expression. The slight tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes darted toward Richard as if seeking approval. It was enough to make Evelyn's chest ache with something deeper than anger, something closer to grief. The judge entered and the room fell silent. His presence commanded the air itself, every movement precise, deliberate. Evelyn's throat was dry, her palms slick against her lap. She forced herself to lift her chin, to sit tall, to remind herself she had not endured everything just to falter now. The judge's voice was steady, measured. He began by summarizing the case, outlining the arguments made by both sides, the claims of instability, the accusations of erratic decisions, the counter-arguments of independence, clarity, and competence. Each word felt like a drumbeat, carrying her closer to the moment that would decide everything. Finally, he looked up from his papers, his gaze sweeping the courtroom before resting on Evelyn. After reviewing the evidence, after considering the testimony provided, this court finds that Mrs. Evelyn Carter is competent to manage her own affairs. The words crashed over her like a tidal wave, drowning her in relief so profound she nearly gasped. Her heart surged in her chest, tears stinging her eyes. For weeks she had lived with the threat of being erased, of being stripped of her voice, and in a single sentence the weight lifted. Beside her, Laura allowed a small smile, her hand brushing lightly against Evelyn's arm in quiet acknowledgement. Across the aisle, Richard's composure cracked, his jaw tightening as fury shadowed his face. Jessica's expression faltered, her mask slipping for the briefest moment as shock flickered across her features. Evelyn drew in a slow, steady breath. She wanted to savor this moment, to let it etch itself into her memory. Not because she had won against them, but because she had reclaimed herself. Her voice, her dignity, her autonomy, things she had always deserved but had been forced to fight for in her own home. The judge continued, warning both parties to move forward with civility, to respect the decision of the court. But Evelyn barely heard the words. She was too busy listening to the rhythm of her own heart, too busy holding on to the sense of freedom blossoming inside her chest. When the gavel struck and the hearing was adjourned, Evelyn rose with trembling legs. She steadied herself, drawing strength from the resolve burning through her veins. She turned briefly, her eyes brushing over Richard. His glare was venomous, his lips curled with disdain. Jessica, however, kept her eyes down, her hands clutching the strap of her purse as though it might anchor her in place. Evelyn walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. The corridor buzzed with voices, the shuffle of footsteps, but she heard none of it clearly. The world felt sharper, brighter, as if victory itself had sharpened the edges of reality. On the courthouse steps, the cool breeze met her skin, carrying with it the scent of autumn leaves. She paused, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash fully through her. The world had not caged her. Her daughter had not silenced her. Her ex-husband had not broken her. She was free, and that freedom was worth every bruise, every sleepless night, every tear shed in solitude. Laura joined her outside, her tone firm but kind. "You should be proud." You held your ground with more grace than most people half your age. Evelyn managed a soft smile, her throat too tight for words. She nodded, grateful, and looked out over the steps where people hurried by, unaware of the battle that had just been fought and won inside those walls. Yet beneath her relief, she knew this was not the end. Richard's rage would not dissipate so easily. Jessica's loyalty to him would not unravel overnight. The victory was hers, but the war was far from finished. Still, Evelyn felt stronger than she had in years. She had faced the fire and emerged intact. Whatever came next, she would not be cowed, not be silenced. She had proved her strength not only to the court, but to herself. The sun broke through the clouds, warming her face as she descended the courthouse steps. For the first time in a long time, she felt light. She was no longer the woman caged by fear, defined by betrayal. She was Evelyn Carter, steadfast, unbroken, and ready for whatever storm might still gather on the horizon. What happens when victory doesn't end the war, but instead opens a new battlefield? For Evelyn Carter, the courtroom triumph was not a final chapter, but a doorway into even deeper conflict. She had won the right to her own life, but the shadows of betrayal still lingered in her home and in her heart. The night after the verdict, the mansion felt different. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was alive with the echo of Evelyn's resilience. Yet beneath that strength was an ache that no ruling could erase. She sat in the living room, a cup of tea warming her palm, staring at the fire as it cracked and hissed. She thought about Richard's glare, Jessica's fleeting shock, and the undeniable truth that blood did not guarantee loyalty. The creak of footsteps drew her from her thoughts. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes uncertain. She lingered there as if standing on the edge of a confession. "Mom," she began softly, "I didn't think it would go that far. I didn't—" Her words faltered. Evelyn's chest tightened. She wanted to rage, to ask how her own daughter could stand beside Richard, how she could watch her mother be humiliated. But instead, Evelyn simply said, "You chose him over me." Jessica's eyes glistened, though her pride kept her spine stiff. "I was scared. Dad made it sound like you were going to fall apart, like you needed to be protected from yourself. I thought I was doing the right thing." The fire cracked louder, filling the heavy silence between them. Evelyn's voice was steady, though it trembled beneath the weight of years. "Protecting me doesn't mean destroying me. You didn't stand beside me, Jessica. You tried to bury me." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes, and for the first time in years, her bravado slipped. She crossed the room, sinking into the chair opposite her mother. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I didn't realize how wrong I was until I heard you speak in court. You didn't break. You were stronger than I've ever seen you." Evelyn studied her daughter, searching for sincerity. For a moment, she glimpsed the child she had once cradled, the little girl who had clung to her during thunderstorms. Her heart ached with both love and distrust. "Words won't heal what you did," Evelyn said quietly. "Only time and change will." Jessica nodded, wiping at her cheeks. "I'll try. I'll get a job. I'll take care of myself. I don't want to lose you, Mom." The admission cracked something inside Evelyn. Hope was dangerous, but it flickered nonetheless. She offered a small nod, the closest thing to forgiveness she could manage. "We'll see." Days passed, each one carrying the weight of unspoken tension. Jessica began searching for work, her determination halting, but real. Evelyn watched from a distance, cautious but faintly proud. The house, once suffocated by hostility, began to breathe again. But Richard was not finished. He called one evening, his voice sharp with venom. "You think you won, Evelyn? The judge gave you this round, but don't fool yourself. That house is still half mine. I'll take what I'm owed, one way or another." Evelyn's grip tightened around the phone. "You've taken enough from me, Richard. You won't take my peace," he laughed bitterly. "Peace? You'll never know it as long as I'm alive." Then the line went dead, leaving Evelyn standing in the quiet, her heart thundering. She set the phone down slowly, her breath steadying. For a moment, fear clawed at her chest, but then resolve surged, stronger than the dread. Richard could threaten all he wanted, she would not be broken. Later that night, Jessica found her mother at the kitchen table, papers spread before her. Evelyn looked up, exhaustion etched into her features, but there was a fire in her eyes. "Your father is going to push harder now," she said, "but I won't bend." Jessica hesitated, then reached out, placing her hand over her mother's. then neither will I. It was a fragile alliance, one built on the ashes of betrayal, but it was enough to steady Evelyn's heart. For the first time in years, she felt she might not be entirely alone in the storm. Still, she knew better than to believe the battle was over. Richard would not fade quietly into the background. His hunger for control, for ownership, was too deep. But Evelyn was no longer the woman who endured silently. She had found her voice, her strength, and she would wield them without fear. The fire in the hearth dimmed to glowing embers, casting long shadows across the room. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her daughter's hand still over hers, and allowed herself a single breath of peace. It was fragile, temporary, but it was hers. Stay with Evelyn's story. The storms ahead will test her, break illusions, and forge truth sharper than steel. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the final battles will reveal not just who survives, but who transforms in the fire. The mansion had begun to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place of uneasy truce. The tension was still there, pulsing him under the surface. But Evelyn Carter sensed a shift in the air. Jessica no longer prowled the house with cold defiance. Instead, she moved with something closer to humility, her steps quieter, her eyes avoiding confrontation. One evening, Evelyn returned from the grocery store to find her daughter at the dining room table with a laptop open, job listings glowing on the screen. Jessica looked up, almost sheepishly, as if afraid of judgment. "I had an interview today," she said. "It went okay. They said they'd call me back next week." Evelyn set the bags down, studying her carefully. The words were plain, but there was a tremor of sincerity in her voice, a vulnerability Evelyn hadn't heard in years. She gave a small nod, unwilling to offer too much too soon. "That's good," she said softly. "Keep going." Jessica's lips twitched as though she wanted to smile but didn't know how. She bent back to the laptop and Evelyn felt a strange warmth bloom inside her chest, a fragile ember of hope. The days turned into weeks, each one marked by small but significant changes. Jessica took a part-time job at a local bookstore, her clothes smelling faintly of ink and paper when she came home. She began cooking simple meals, clumsy but earnest attempts at easing her mother's burdens. Evelyn watched it all with cautious eyes, torn between pride and the sting of old wounds. One night, as rain lashed against the windows, Jessica sat across from her mother at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. She stared into the steam for a long time before speaking. "I don't know how to make this right," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I've been selfish, cruel. I thought siding with Dad gave me power, but yeah, all it did was make me blind. You deserve better from me." Evelyn's throat tightened. For so long, she had waited for words like these, yet hearing them now brought both relief and pain. "You can't erase the past," she said gently, "but you can choose differently now." Tears slipped down Jessica's cheeks, unchecked. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to become someone you can never trust again." For a long time, Evelyn said nothing. She studied her daughter, seeing not just the woman who had betrayed her, but the girl she had once tucked into bed, the teenager who had slammed doors out of misplaced anger, the adult who had lost herself in the shadow of her father. She saw all the fragments of Jessica layered together, messy and flawed, but undeniably hers. Finally, Evelyn reached across the table, laying her hand gently over Jessica's. "Trust has to be rebuilt," she whispered, "one step at a time." Jessica's grip tightened, desperate, grateful. And in that moment, something fragile but real began to mend between them. Still, Evelyn's peace was far from secure. Richard's voice continued to poison the edges of her days. Letters arrived, threats veiled in legal language, demands for his share of the house's value, promises to drag her back into court if she didn't comply. Each envelope was a reminder that the war was not yet won, that the man she had once called her husband would never release his grip willingly. Evelyn no longer trembled when she read them. She would lay the letters flat on the table, her eyes calm, her resolve firm. She had faced him in court and prevailed. She would face him again if she must. But this time she was not entirely alone. Jessica began intercepting the calls, slamming the phone down when Richard's venom hissed through the line. "You don't get to speak to her like that anymore," she snapped once, her voice fierce, before turning back to her mother with fire in her eyes. Evelyn watched with a mixture of surprise and pride, recognizing that her daughter's awakening was no act. It was a transformation born of regret and the desire to heal. The nights grew quieter, more bearable. Evelyn found herself lingering in the garden again, hands brushing the petals of roses she had neglected in darker days. Jessica joined her sometimes, pulling weeds, her laughter awkward but real when she tripped over uneven stones. They were building something new, not perfect, not unbroken, but alive. One evening, Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, older but unbowed, her eyes carrying both the scars of her battles and the strength she had earned. She thought of Richard, of the war he still waged, of the threats that would surely continue. But for the first time, she did not feel like prey. She felt like a survivor, like a fighter, like a woman who had risen from ashes stronger than before. Behind her, Jessica appeared in the doorway, her voice hesitant. "Mom?" Evelyn turned, her expression softening. "Yes, Jessica?" Her daughter shifted on her feet, almost shy. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "Don't thank me, show me." Jessica nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. And in that quiet exchange, Evelyn felt a fragile thread weaving between them again. Something that might one day grow strong enough to hold. The war was not over. Richard's shadow still loomed, his threat still poised in the air. But Evelyn no longer faced the storm alone. She had her strength, her voice, and perhaps, at last, her daughter by her side. The weeks that followed were filled with a fragile rhythm of change. Evelyn Carter woke each morning with the steady pulse of determination in her chest, no longer haunted by the same helplessness that once bound her. The mansion felt lighter, though Richard's shadow still lingered in every unopened letter and every late-night phone call. He had not given up, and Evelyn knew he never would. But she had changed. She was no longer the woman who trembled under his threats. One evening, another letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was sharp, familiar. Evelyn opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the venomous words inside. Richard demanded half the value of the house, insisting he would file new petitions if she did not comply. His words dripped with entitlement, a final attempt to claw at the life he had abandoned years ago. Evelyn set the letter on the table and folded her hands over it, her heart steady. She was not afraid. She called Laura Mitchell the next morning, her voice calm. "He wants to take the house," she said. Laura sighed, her tone practical but firm. "He has no claim. You won in court, Evelyn. Let him rage. He cannot touch what's yours unless you allow it." Those words sealed something inside her. Richard's power over her had never been legal. It had been emotional, rooted in years of intimidation and control. But those roots had finally been cut. Jessica noticed the shift too. She came home from work at the bookstore one evening, setting her bag down by the door. "Another letter?" she asked, her eyes falling on the envelope, still lying unopened on the counter. "Yes," Evelyn replied, her tone even. "But it doesn't matter. Not anymore." Jessica moved closer, uncertainty clouding her face. "Are you sure? He doesn't seem like the kind of man to stop." Evelyn looked at her daughter, the woman she had raised, the woman who had once betrayed her but now stood trying to make amends. "He can scream into the wind until his voice gives out," she said softly. "It won't change who I am. It won't change what I've built. He doesn't own me anymore." Jessica's eyes shone, and for a moment she looked like the child Evelyn had once comforted, vulnerable and in need of reassurance. "I don't know how you're so strong," Jessica whispered. "I'm strong because I had to be," Evelyn replied. "And now I choose to be." The words settled between them like a vow. In the days that followed, Evelyn poured herself back into the parts of life she had long neglected. She tended the roses in her garden, their blossoms opening brighter than they had in years. She reorganized her study, reclaiming the space as her own. She even joined a small group at the community center. Women her age who met weekly to talk, to laugh, to share stories of resilience. For the first time in decades, Evelyn felt herself not just surviving, but living. Jessica continued her slow transformation as well. She worked more shifts at the bookstore, sometimes coming home tired, but with the faint glow of purpose in her eyes. She cooked dinner without being asked, her dishes clumsy, but improving. There were still silences, still moments when trust faltered, But Evelyn began to see glimpses of the bond they had both thought lost. It was not perfect, but it was beginning. One evening, Evelyn stood in the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson. She felt the cool breeze lift her hair and closed her eyes, savoring the moment. She thought of Richard, of the years he had stolen, of the battles still ahead. But instead of dread, she felt peace. She would fight him if he tried again, but his power was gone. Her voice was her own. Her dignity was unshaken. Her freedom was intact. Jessica came to stand beside her, quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Evelyn turned her head, a soft smile touching her lips. "And I'm proud of you, for trying, for finally seeing me." The two of them stood there in silence, the night settling gently around them. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the future not as a threat, but as a promise. Richard would always be out there, scheming, snarling, trying to take what was never his to claim. But Evelyn Carter had learned the greatest truth of all. Real freedom doesn't come from court rulings or locked doors. It comes from standing tall, refusing to be silenced, and claiming the life that is rightfully yours. She had fought for that freedom. She had earned it. And no one, not Richard, not even the echoes of her own fears, could take it away. This story is not just Evelyn's. It is for anyone who has ever been betrayed, for anyone who has ever felt powerless, for anyone who has forgotten their strength. If Evelyn's journey has touched you, if her defiance has reminded you of your own fire, then let her story live on. Like, share, and subscribe so that others may find hope in her voice. Because even in the